Today is the 22nd of April, and we are interested in highlighting a second in our series. So we talked about network infrastructure, using a managed switch becomes the anchor to control your network environment. Now we're going to pivot and turn and look at Active Directory. And what we'd like to do is create a brand new Active Directory domain before your very eyes. We're going to use some methods to mass produce domain servers by cloning Hyper-V virtual machines. And then on Tuesday, we'll be looking at PowerShell scripting and batch file programming. So today's focus is Active Directory. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. What you're witnessing is one of the methods to clone Hyper-V servers. And this is perhaps the most straightforward way. You can export a VM and then import it. You can do a variety of things to try to clone a machine. But ultimately, when you clone a machine, you have to take care of some finer points. When the machine is started up, what happens is that if the first machine is running, so you can essentially copy the virtual hard disk, right? So you turn off the virtual machine that you want to clone. You copy the virtual hard disk of the machine you just turned off to a directory where you want the new VM to be created. And then in the manager, you open settings and create a new VM. And you attach the virtual hard disk that you just copied, right? And then you start the new virtual machine up while the original machine remains powered off. Then you change the IP address and name of the machine so that eventually you can turn on the other machine, the original machine, the one you're going to use as a template. Now, here's the most important point. Even after you change the IP address and the name, the SID or security ID, the identity of the machine, stays in place. And so in terms of Active Directory, when you start working at or looking at computer accounts, it starts to get pretty dicey. Once you change the IP address and the name of that new clone, while the old machine is turned off, you're going to power on that machine and you're going to run sysprep and make sure that you select UBI and generalize and shut down. And we've talked about this before, but basically, once the machine powers off, as soon as that machine powers off, that's the VHD that you can use as a template for new clone machines. It's going to have a different IP address than existing machines, and it's going to be generalized. So you don't just copy and keep copying the same VHD. You have to create a generalized virtual machine, shut it down, and then use that VHD to create new ones. Let's take a look at how this looks here. So here's the example of the extra machine. I had a machine called Mercury, and I'm going to use that to rapidly reproduce all the necessary infrastructure to build an Active Directory domain. So I have a template Active Directory server model in the form of Mercury, and I copied the VHD, and then I built a machine called Mensa. And I took the steps that you just saw me share with you. I changed the address, I changed the name to Mensa. And then while the old machine is still powered off, and with the new machine running, I dug into the Windows System32 sysprep directory and found sysprep, right-clicked it and ran as admin. And I had to check this box for generalize, and I had to hit this pull down and change it from reboot to shut down. As soon as I clicked OK, Mensa finished generalizing. That means it lobotomized the identity, the security ID, all that kind of stuff. And it did its job. What you see here is Mensa as I've restarted it. Now, what did I do before I restarted this? I made a copy of Mensa's hard disk, and I created, so here was Mensa's hard disk after it was shut down. And I made a copy of it I call template. And now every time I want to start a new virtual machine, I'm going to use the template VHD, in this case VHDX. I'll make a copy of it. I'll just basically copy it, and then I'll go ahead and paste. You see, I've done this already. I'm going to create a new machine called Orion. Orion and Mensa will together become the two machines that will be domain controllers for an entirely new domain, right? I'm going to give it a -C. That's going to be the C drive for Orion, Orion-C. And in a second, I'm going to build Orion so you can see how this looks. When I start Orion, I should get this same screen here. But by that time, I should be able to specify a different IP address for Mensa and then change the name. So in any case, I'm here. It says, what's your home country? I could pick Virgin Islands if it gave me the option. I don't see the option. Well, I do see US Virgin Islands. What's your preferred app language? I'm not going to add another language. The US keyboard is what we're going to do. Choose a language. Oh, okay. It's going to be English. US English. I suppose I could use Jamaican English if I wanted to be, or Trinidad and Tobago English. But because this is a US territory, I'm just going to pick US, okay? Here are the license terms. So this is refreshing. I'm not duplicating the license because I ran OOBE, I ran sysprep. It's basically given me the opportunity to start over again with licensing as well. I'm going to accept the administrative login and put in password I can use, a long, complex password, because these are going to be very important machines. I'm going to build my entire infrastructure on them. So I want to make sure that I have more than 14 characters. If you have more than 14 characters, it takes a rainbow table that's so large, most hackers could never afford to try to look up the hash of my password and crack my password. What I want to do now is log in here and see what my IP address is. Everything else should be good to go, except that I may see a cryptic name, even though the virtual machine name is Mensa, the actual computer system name inside may be something else. Let's see what it shows when we get in here. I'm going to get rid of this task view button. I'm always going to answer no. I don't want my machine to be discovered by other machines on the network. Now, one reason for having Mercury as a role model is that it includes DNS. So I'm getting extra DNS servers. I wonder if the DNS role is going to be in here. Not seeing it yet. Yes, DNS. So DNS, was included in Mercury, and that's not a bad role to duplicate for all sorts of reasons. It's easy to remove that role, but for the two machines we're about to build, Mensa and Orion are going to use DNS because they're going to become domain controllers. Okay, I'm going to click on local server. My product ID is not activated, so I need to see about that. I need to make sure my IP address is unique, and I need to change the computer name. That's what Ubi generalize and shutdown does for me. This is ideal because that template hard disk is not going to create a virtual machine that's going to become a train wreck. I'm not going to duplicate names or addresses. Let's start first with my IP address. I'd like to make sure that my IP address is unique. I've already designated 245. I'm going to turn off IPv6 because not everything I'm using has it. I'm going to use 192.168.50.245 as the address for Mensa. Subnet mask is a 24-bit subnet mask. Is everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
My DNS server is actually Mercury. I'm going to leave that in place. Because it's going to point to the new domain. So that's all I'm going to put for my DNS. I'm going to go into here. I'm going to select WinS, and I'm going to disable the NetBIOS over TCP/IP. If I have trouble joining the domain, once the domain is created, I can leave it in the default setting, join the domain, and then disable it again. This is a best practice. You only elevate, you only use what you have to, and then you put it back, right? It's a best practice. So now we have the network configured properly. What comes next is the license. Oh, you see, I have a license. So eventually the license activated because I used the general key for standard servers that are running in a data center license. So I just had to wait for that to sync up. By fixing the network address, I got a positive result for my licensing, and that corrected itself. That's good. Generalizing a computer, when you shut it down, it takes a weird name. I want to match the name that I have. I'm going to change it to Mensa. And I'm going to leave it in the Mojave workgroup. So I'm changing the default workgroup name of workgroup because that's a terrible security hole. I'm going to go ahead and restart my system and close. Restart now. So let's see how cool we can and how fast we can build a new machine with the template. You saw what we did before working with Ubi. I just created Orion, the C drive for Orion, by copying the template drive. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize my running machines. I'm going to open up my Hyper-V manager, and I'm going to create another new machine, a virtual machine. I'm going to call it Orion. Everybody with me so far? When you create a new Active Directory domain, you need to have two machines that you designate as domain controllers. Orion and Mensa are going to be devoted to that purpose. They also have to run DNS, and DNS is already installed. So I've killed two birds with one stone. It's a generation 1 virtual machine. I'm going to give it 4096 gigs of RAM. I'm going to connect it to the local external. I'm going to bridge that adapter. So that's what I'm doing here. I've called it Orion, but instead of using a new virtual disk, I'm going to claim one that already exists, Orion-C, which I created by copying the template. Now I have my virtual machine ready and it's created. I need to adjust some settings very quickly. I'm not going to boot from the CD. I'm going to boot from the hard disk. I'm going to change the processor priority and put 15% as a minimum. I'm going to apply that. I'm going to go down here to integration services and check guest services so I get better control over the mouse. For checkpoints, I don't want checkpoints. This is going to be a production server. I'm not using it to develop software, so I'm not going to be doing snapshots and rollbacks and that kind of thing. I don't want checkpoints. Checkpoint is the term for snapshot and rollback that you see in VirtualBox or in VMware. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about there? Okay. For now, I don't want my host machine to turn it on. Once I configure the domain controller on this, I will change this so that it automatically starts when my host machine starts. And I want it to shut down gracefully if the host machine is going to power off. So at this point, I'm ready to start Orion. Now, mind you, I've already run Windows updates with WSUS. It took very little time to synchronize the updates using Windows Software Update Services. It says I'm starting successfully. So at this point, if I've grabbed the right copy of VHD, the virtual hard disk, it should come up as if it was Mensa because it was just generalized. And it should ask me to put in a password, pick the language, designate the national status. There you see the pre-executable environment. That Windows logo looks a little skinnier. So it's starting up as if it was a brand new machine. I'm going to put a fixed IP address for Orion of 244 so that it's got a fixed address. And I'm also going to adjust the host files so that my DNS and my WSUS server both have entries for Mensa and Orion has entries for Mercury and Antares in the host file. So even if DNS is bad, I've got a good result. I'm going to go ahead and minimize my Hyper-V console for just a second. So how long has it been since I took the Orion-C hard drive and I got to this screen right here? How many minutes? Are microphones muted?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to select US English again. I accept the license terms. I'm putting in a complex password for the administrative. I've got my system settings finalized. I should be able to log in. I'm going to change the name and the IP address. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do something similar here. I'm going to turn off the task view button. I'm going to answer no for the networks. I don't want it discoverable by everybody out there. I should see something similar pop up in just a minute. I look at local server. I have a cryptic name again because it's a brand new machine that was started on the generalized. My license is not activated, but we understand that. I'm going to go into here and assign a static IP address after I disable IPv6. For Orion, I'm going to use a dedicated address, a fixed address, an unchanging address, because it's going to be a domain controller 244. The gateway is going to be 192.168.50.1. And we're going to use the same DNS machine. Mercury, initially for this. I'm going to say, okay, and okay, and close, and close. And if I hit refresh, I may get an activated option here at some point. I'm going to go ahead and change the computer name inside the running system to Orion. Again, it's in the Mojave work group. I have to restart my system to apply changes. Close. So what was the total time lapsed to take the copied VHD, build a VM, fire it up, change the settings so it's unique, and run with it? How many minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes to build an entire Microsoft system, a server, right? Industrial class system. I'm going to create a whole new domain. And what I'd like to do is show you the steps that you need to follow to build a domain. We have Orion and we have Mensa that are two new machines that have just been created by cloning VHDs. Yeah, it took about 10 minutes each. And now that we have, I want to make sure that I have a good license. This says not activated. And I could enter the license manually, but I do know that when I'm going to be using this machine for a role as important as a domain controller, I better have a license that's good. The license just updated. It is an activated license now. So I just needed to make sure I've got it. Okay. So at this point, what I'm going to do is use Orion as the lead for a new domain. And I want you to see that how easy it is to build a domain and to create some work groups, some basic security groups, and then to have the infrastructure that you need to be able to enforce GPOs on a domain level. So instead of having to go to each local security policy and change the pointers to WSUS, to change how often the password needs to be changed, what criteria is going to be used to secure the passwords, how many previous passwords will it remember or not accept, how many false attempts or failed attempts will it take. There's all sorts of policies that allow you to do things. But this is where centralized management with Windows Admin Center becomes automatic. Once a system is part of a domain, and you start using Windows Admin Center to manage domain machines, you don't have the same challenges that you do with Workgroup. So what we're trying to do is to show you the major benefit of building a domain. It's not a lot of real estate. It's a single license. You run virtual machines. Each of the virtual machines are licensed internally automatically. You have 4 machines that are running. They take up a couple of hundred gigs, 200 gigs, 240 gigs of hard disk space. Considering the cost of terabyte drives now, that's nothing, right? So you have a chance to work a enterprise security account management scenario where you can automate everything. So I'm going to add a role or a feature. And I'm going to choose Orion. Are there any questions before we start with the building of the domain? Okay. I'm going to add Active Directory domain services. When I add Active Directory domain services, I'm saying I want to make this machine a domain controller. I want it to store the accounts management database for the entire organization. The first time I do this, the first domain controller for a new domain is the lead of the domain and the forest. So what happens is that a domain is considered like a tree, and if there are child domains, everybody understands DNS, yes?
Yeah.
So uvi.edu is a lead domain. If I made this uvi.edu, then a child domain might be students.uvi.edu, faculty.uvi.edu, staff.uvi.edu. Those are child domains. Those are like branches on the tree. You can have multiple trees or multiple domains in what's called a forest. But the very first one that you create is the domain controller, not just for the domain, but also for the tree and for the forest. That's how an Active Directory enterprise environment is structured. I'm going to add features. So now this is checked. I've already got DNS installed. So I'm going to hit next. I'm going to accept this the way it is, the defaults. I'm going to say next here. It's asking me about connecting to Azure Directory domain services. I don't want to do that right now. I don't want to integrate this in the cloud. This is going to require a restart. I'll say yes. I'll click install. And away it goes. So it's installing the Active Directory role with all the tools that it will need to be a domain controller. Now, the DNS that runs on a domain controller is called AD integrated DNS. We do not want that to be the normal DNS we use to browse the internet. That's why we have a separate DNS server. We have a separate DNS server in the way of Mercury. Mercury provides the resources we need to browse the internet and to find resources online. And it's dedicated for that role. And it's the same kind of scenario we were talking about before. You have a DHCP server, you use an IP helper statement to do this. I want you to notice that there's a midnight.net domain name that it's a suffix that we set up on Mercury, and now it's been cloned, so it's on Orion and on Mensa. Do we want to continue to use midnight.net for a domain? Is that a public domain? Does anyone know?
I'm not sure.
Well, here's what I did. I went online. I think Raheem suggested midnight.net. I wanted to see, is it really a real domain? And here's what I got. Hey, it's not secured. It is real and it's not secured. So I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know that I really want to use midnight.net if it's somebody's real domain. I mean, I know this is an internal domain, so what I'm going to do when this asks me to reboot, before I reboot, I'm going to change the suffix that I entered on the computer name to something other than midnight.net. I'm also going to do that in Orion, in Mensa, and I'll also do that in Mercury and Antares. So instead of having midnight.net being the domain suffix, we'll put in there what's consistent. Does anybody have a preference for a domain name? I will tell you this, you have to give as much thought to a name and the use of the IP address so it never changes. Fixed IP address that never changes, a name that never changes. We've been using the names of stars and constellations. We could fashion our new domain after a galaxy because there are lots of stars in a galaxy. What do you think?
Yeah, that
Andromeda is already Canis. Oh, I like that. Canis has other, okay, so Virgo is a star name, but Canis, yeah, I like that. We'll use Canis. Okay. And because we're creating a local, private, internal, enterprise grade, Fortune 500 or government level domain, something that can scale, right, to thousands of machines, instead of giving it a public domain name, we're going to give it a private Active Directory domain name that's local. So we'll call it canis.local. Are you with me?
yeah.
It says configuration required, installation succeeded. So now I have to configure this domain. Before I do that, I want to change the suffix. So I am going to close this. And I am going to make this one change. And while I'm at it, I'm going to change the name of this PC to Orion, just so that when I'm logged in, I can see what it's all about. I'm going to go to properties and change settings and to more. And I'm going to change this midnight.net to canis.local. And that tells me the domain is an Active Directory enterprise domain, but it's not a public domain name. I can have canis.edu, canis.net, canis.biz, canis.com, canis.us, canis.vi. I can use Canis with a whole variety of public domain, top-level domains, but I have to register that public domain name before I can use it with email and web servers with the open public internationally and globally. That doesn't prevent me from starting my enterprise locally. The internal machines that run all my business stuff, I don't want those accessible to the world. They won't be. It'll be private, internal, and rock solid, completely stable with redundancy. So no matter what happens with the internet service or power outages, I'm going to keep on rocking. I'm changing this to canis.local. It's going to tell me it needs to restart, and I want it to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and restart now, and then I'll finish configuring the domain as soon as we come back. While I'm waiting, I'm going to go ahead and change Mensa the same way, canis.local. I just want everything to be consistent. Because if you get confusing domain names in your configurations, well, that creates all kinds of problems, right? Got to rename this Mensa. So when I'm looking at the PC, I know what I'm dealing with. I'm going to go into here and change this to Canis.local. By the way, has anybody seen the trailer for the new Mortal Kombat? We got any Mortal Kombat fans out there?
I have. It's been what, almost 20 years since
Since
we had a
this,
new one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it looks good. It looks good. I don't know if you're a fan, but oh my gosh, I've been waiting forever for that. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna make this change everywhere else, right? Let's see. So I've changed Orion, I've changed Mensa. I have changed, see, once I create the first domain controller with Orion, then Mensa can join the domain. And then once Mensa and Mercury are members of the domain, then Mensa can become a domain controller also. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create the first anchor. I need to get in here though. I already have the name Mercury established. I'm going to change this midnight.net to Canis.local. Can't afford a misspelling. And I think there's only one more I have to change. It might be Antares. Midnight.net needs to change to Canis.local. Now, for all the new machines that I create in this domain, I'm not going to have to do this manually. When I join the domain Canis.local, it'll take on the name Canis.local automatically. But because I manually assigned the DNS suffix, the domain name suffix for this so that they could see each other and talk to each other, that's where we're going next. I don't think I did this on Andromeda. Please hope I didn't. Nope. The host machine is not Canis.local. Okay, so what we did was we changed some previous named references for domains and work groups. So as soon as we leave, they're all a member of the Mojave work group, but as soon as I start joining them to the domain, what will happen is that one at a time, they'll all become members of the Canis.local domain as soon as we build it. So here we go. We have like 15 minutes left in class, but we're going to be able to build an entire enterprise domain to scale in a single class period. And I want you to know, you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, we don't need a domain, we just need a work group. You're going to hear a lot of people, a lot of consultants say, that's because they don't know how to do this stuff. And they don't want you to set up something that they don't know how to manage or handle. It's job security. But to make a long story short, centralized management of your systems is the only way to go. I know that you've seen me take a lot of additional efforts to make workgroup scenarios, single security account management workgroup model scenarios to work right. You have to go through all these extra hoops. What you're beginning to see now is what happens when you start to automate this. I'm going to promote this server to a domain controller. So once you add the Active Directory domain services role, you have to promote the server to a domain controller. When you click this, it says, I'm going to add a domain controller to an existing domain. No, I don't have an existing domain. Am I going to add a new domain to an existing forest? No. I'm going to create a whole new forest. And I'm going to call the new forest canis.local. The first tree in the forest is the name of the forest. My forest and domain name is Canis. And I'm going to use canis.local because I want to tell the world this is not a public domain name. I'm not going to put machines in this domain, in this infrastructure out on the open internet. I'll have other ones that I use as front ends to the back end, but I'll have this smooth, stable, and hot running on the back end. Nobody's going to be able to mess with this. So I'm creating a whole new forest. That's going to give Orion a special role within the domain. It's going to ask me what functional level I need to operate on. And if you can go higher than 2016, you should always choose the highest level. I'm going to type in a password. This is a directory services restore mode password. This is a highly privileged account, and you're going to need to put in something very complex that no one can guess. At least 14 characters, upper and lower case, special characters and numbers. It's going to make it really hard for somebody to hack this. I'm going to create a DNS delegation. It says that delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. Well, that's okay. We're going to create the authoritative parent zone for canis.local. We're just creating a new domain name and a zone to begin with. So it's giving me this error message or this alert, but I understand already that canis.local is something we just created. So I'm going to click next. The NetBIOS domain name is what we use when, well, when older systems need to connect to it. It's going to make the canis.local just plain canis in all caps. That's what LAN manager, old school, old networks use to connect. I'm going to say next and accept that without changing it. It's telling me where it's going to store the enterprise security account management database. It's called NTDS. It's giving me all of these different confirmation details. I'm going to say next. And it says prerequisites need to be validated before Active Directory domain services is installed on this computer. Verifying prerequisites for domain controller operation. Windows Server 2019 controllers have a default for security settings named allow cryptographic algorithms compatible. If you click install, the server automatically reboots at the end of the promotion era. What I'm looking for is something other than a red X. The fact that I have an exclamation point is not the end of the day. So at this point, I can proceed because I don't have a red X. I just have a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. Well, we already know, we already talked about that. I don't need that information. This is going to change. I'll click install. Now away we go. Now I'm creating an entire enterprise global. This is globally capable. I can set up servers on every continent on the planet, in every nation on every continent, in every province or state, in every territory of every nation, of every continent on the planet, in every county, in every municipal area. I can have thousands of servers. I can support 1 million systems with this domain right here, literally. And when you think about how quick and easy that was, I just created the same kind of domain that Ford Motor Company uses to run its corporate headquarters and all of its branch offices. Woohoo! We just created a domain, the same kind that the US Army uses to manage the entire United States Army Windows systems globally, worldwide, everywhere, over 1 million systems. That's what we just did. But we're not going to have all of our eggs in one basket. If something happens to Orion, we lose everything. So we're going to create Mensa. We're going to join the domain on Orion with Mensa, and then we're going to promote Mensa to be a domain controller so that we have at least 2 domain controllers and a separate DNS. That's the minimum you need, even for a small outfit. And then you have everything it takes to scale up to the big time, the big leagues, but you have everything you need to be redundant, to have totally reliable service. You'd be shocked at how many large organizations don't have a properly functioning domain. Or if they do, they have a very old one and it wasn't configured properly in the first place. The key to having a domain work properly is its DNS and the settings and getting it on an internal private IP address range so that it's not open to the world. So every little nibbler in the ocean can swim up and take a bite out of it. I have too many organizations in our territory that set up on public network address ranges because it was just easy to do and they didn't want to set up NAT, they didn't want to set up private internal address ranges, and so on. Are there any questions at this point?
No, no question.
If 100 systems join this domain, I can create a new user and that new user can log into any of those 100 machines or only on the machines that I specify that user can log into. I can create a login script. So when that user logs in on any of the 100 machines, that user's profile, their desktop, their photos, their documents, their shortcuts, even their desktop graphics, everything follows them. No matter where they go, they just log in and it moves with them on 100 different systems. It's a thing of beauty. It does take a while for this to finish grinding out. And I did go very lean on the physical hardware resources I devoted for Orion. Once the domain controller role is installed, one of the things I want to do is run updates. And then I want to do disk cleanup and defrag. I want to get Orion running very smooth and clean and bulletproof so that as other machines join, there will be fewer problems. I may also want to modify the hosts file at a minimum so that Orion knows who Mensa is and Mensa knows who Orion is. So even if they lose their DNS, they don't lose each other. I can also use the canis.local domain name now in the hosts file. So instead of just having a host name, a plain name, I can say mensa.canis.local, orion.canis.local. So hopefully in a minute, we'll have a domain controller we can use to accept membership from other machines to join the domain. And again, we said the first thing we're going to do is take Mensa, join it to the domain, add the domain controller role, first by adding Active Directory, directory services, and then promoting it. We'll be using it to join an existing domain at that point, canis.local. It'll become the second domain controller. And then the two of them will work in tandem. So if Orion has to reboot, Mensa accepts logins. Mensa helps with network drive maps. Mensa helps with redundant resources on the network. If one's down because of a reboot, the other one's still going. That's why you have two of them at least. In larger organizations, they often have two domain controllers at each location. Some of them are called read-only domain controllers. That allows people to log in locally, but if the darn thing is stolen, well, you can't make changes on that machine. It's only a read-only copy of the domain controller. But if your network dies, people can still log in, they can still get to their stuff, they can still find their resources. So this is taking a while. I'm going to go ahead into Mensa while I'm waiting. And I'm going to, oh, there we go. In Mensa, I'm going to add an entry in the host file. And I'm also going to make a change on Mercury. In Mercury, we have a DNS machine. We want everybody that is on this local network to be able to find the domain controllers. So on Mercury, I'm going to create a new zone called canis.local. Yep. Whoa, come on now. So I'm doing that because I want Mensa to be able to find this other machine. On Mercury, I'm going to open up DNS. And I'm going to create a new forward lookup zone. I got to remove the midnight.net zone. I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to create a new forward lookup zone that I call, let's see, zone containing only the name, server, and start of authority. I'm not going to create a primary zone. I'm going to create a stub zone. I want to refer to canis.local on these machines. So the zone name is canis.local. And it's going to create this zone file name. And I'm going to put in the IP address of the domain name server for that domain. That's the same as Orion. .245 is Orion. Pretty sure it's 245. Or is it 244? I better be sure. Oh, I'm looking at Mercury. Hold on. Orion. So I'm going to log in to the domain Canis. with that recovery account that I set up, and I'm going to create a new account called an enterprise administrator domain administrator account. And I'm going to use that to log in. Inside my tools, I'll now see Active Directory users and computers. And here's the part that I wanted to show you. Once you have a new domain, you can create organizational units. You can create all sorts of things. What do we pin this IP address to? 244. Okay. So it's 244 where we're at. I think Mensa is 245. I'm glad I caught that mistake. That would have been bad. So in Mercury, I'm going to put 244. I'm going to delete that. 192.168.50.244. It says, okay, I found Orion. I know where to go. I'm going to click next. I'm going to click finish. Now I have canis.local. And in a minute, you'll see that the zone will change some settings so that that zone can find its system. One trick is to select the server, right click, clear the cache, and then restart the service. That's something you do when you're setting up new domains, you're setting up new zones, you're setting up anything. You want to clear the cache and then restart the service. So if I refresh this, now I've got a stub zone for canis.local. So if my machine is trying to find canis.local to join the domain, it knows to look to Orion. That one change is important before you start adding all sorts of systems to your system. So here, canis.local, I'm going to create a new organizational unit, and I'm going to view the advanced options, advanced features. Can everybody see my screen? See if we can make
Yeah.
this. I'm going to create a new organizational unit. And I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it EA. This is for enterprise admins, right? So I'll know what EA stands for, but I want a special place to put domain controllers. I want a special place, well, critical systems, privileged accounts, that kind of thing. Okay. I'm going to protect it from accidental deletion. And inside the EA group, I'm going to have a new security group, well, actually a new user. I'll create a new user for myself because I want to use an administrative login. And I should probably use something that's not so commonly known about myself, because if it's a privileged account, you know, people will look me up on the internet and they'll go, oh, it's T. Kentop, because that's the standard thing, right? I'm going to put T. Christian here instead of my last name, because this is so important. And I'm going to type in my complex password. I need this account in order to be able to join other systems to the domain. I'm going to click next. And now, because it's so important, I'm going to go into the properties and I'm going to add domain admins. It's a member of domain administrators. Also enterprise admins. Also schema admins. Schema is the way that the domain is structured in terms of objects, data objects. That's what schema means. So it's a really under the hood kind of kernel level privilege. And you can basically redesign the structure of a domain if you're a schema admins. So now I have a good login to use in order to do the rest of the stuff I need. I think what I really need to do is log out and log in with my proper account to make sure it's going to function correctly. And then I can take care of the rest of the business to join the domain. So I'm going to select other user. This time I'm going to type in T Christian. And if I log in properly, it means that account is working. So when I'm joining other systems to the domain, it's going to say which account and privilege, which account and user is going to authorize this machine to join the domain. That's the T Christian account that I'm going to use. Okay. Any questions so far?
No.
No questions.
If I go in here and I look at Active Directory users and computers again, what you're going to find is that when we look this up, if I'm looking at the advanced options again, advanced features, there is an organizational unit, an OU, called Orion. Well, called domain controllers. And Orion, when it became a domain controller, was moved automatically to the OU called domain controllers. There's special policies or GPOs that apply to that. Group policy objects don't apply to group security groups. This is one misconception, and there's a lot of frustration for people who are just learning how to work in Microsoft domains. But basically, group policy objects apply to organizational units or domains or sites. Group policy objects do not apply to security groups or user groups, even though it's called a group policy object. Group policy objects apply to OUs. But here's the important point. I can create an OU for CSC 255. I can make you the administrators of the CSC 255 organizational unit. You have every bit as much the privilege and administrative authority as a domain administrator. It's just that you have privileges for your organizational unit, the CSC 255 OS class. What am I saying? If you needed to reset passwords, if you needed to add or drop users, if you needed to create security groups, you could do that all within the CSC 255 organizational unit. A lot of people don't realize this, but it's true. Remember, I've also created this special organizational unit. When you join new computers to the domain, they drop them in this container. This is not an organizational unit. It is a directory. It's a container. Group policy objects do not apply to that. You have to move them to another group policy object for the management, the automated management to happen. So that's another common area of mistake for people who are new to domains. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this now. And what I'd like to do is come over to Mensa now. And if I go ahead and I just flush the DNS, if that's all I do is flush the DNS, if I have any negative entries in there, for Orion, and I don't. Whoops. DNS. There we go. I should be able to ping Orion dot what? What's my domain called?
Okay.
Hey, that's a good sign. My DNS is pointed to the domain. It has a stub file for canis.local. So when I try to join the domain, I'll be able to do this. So I'm going to close this now. And I'm going to come into this option here under properties and go to change settings. And I'm going to change from the Mojave workgroup to the domain canis.local. It's going to ask me the name of a privileged account I can use to join the domain with. I want to make sure I have a second domain controller because so much is depending on that. Welcome to the canis.local domain. If your DNS is good, then your domain is good. If that's good, it's because your DHCP is good. If your DHCP is good, it's because the IP helper is good and you have a managed Ethernet switch. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
So I'm going to restart Mensa. Oh, I'm also going to do this with, I'm going to do this with Mercury and Antares too. I want them all in the same domain. Yep. I want to join the domain. Another thing that happens is that when people join the domain and they set up domain users, they often don't set up the domain user properly on a machine. They don't create a proper user account, user profile. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how easy that is to do. You first have to join the domain, canis.local. Come on, Mercury. There you go. It's going to reboot. Yes. Let's take care of the last one then. Antares. Let's get them all on the domain. All right. Here we go. I'm going to change this to the domain from the Mojave workgroup to canis.local. Here's my privileged login. Hopefully I didn't have happy fingers. Oh, the password's incorrect. Let's try it again. Yeah, I get excited when things are working well. And then I get so crazy, I misspell those passwords. It happens. All right, so I have all 4 machines on the domain now, which is really cool because I go back to Orion. And if I look at my Active Directory computers and users, if I look at the computers group, oh, now I have 3 computers on the domain. Look at that. I'm going to go to Mensa. I'm going to turn this one into an Active Directory domain controller. I'm going to log in with my domain credentials. I don't want to use my Mensa administrator credentials. I want to use the domain credentials because I want this to become the other half of the dynamic duo. Orion and Mensa will become the dynamic duo of the canis.local, the canis domain. As soon as this is up here, I'm going to add roles and features. It's collecting inventory. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead here. What's the role I'm going to add? Which one am I going to check to become a domain controller?
Domain,
Say again.
domain,
Domain services, Active Directory domain services. I'm going to click next. I'm going to click next. I'm going to restart this system after it's over. I'm going to hit install. Oh, hey, I didn't get those yellow exclamation points. That's because there is a DNS zone called canis.local. It's running on my own system on my DNS in here. If I look at my Windows administrative tools and put DNS here on the start, I'm going to put this on the start also. If I look at my DNS server called Orion, I have a forward lookup zone right now, and it's called canis.local. I don't want midnight.net. I'm going to take that out. Since I took that out, I'm going to clear the cache with a right click, and then I'm going to restart the service. And as soon as that's finished restarting, I'm good to go. So this has to do with my domain. This has to do with the domain name, canis.local. My reverse lookup is also important. I want to make sure that I have records for the machines that are in there. All right, so this says configuration required, installation succeeded. I'm going to close. Now I'm going to go into here. I'm going to promote this server to a domain controller. Now, am I adding this to an existing domain? Am I adding a new domain to an existing forest? Or am I adding a new forest? Which one am I doing?
existing.
The existing domain is correct. The first option is correct. If I wanted to create a new forest, I could say, okay, let's get another galaxy. Let's use something other than Canis. Let's find another constellation or another galaxy. Oh, Virgo. Virgo is a constellation, right? So you could create a whole new tree, a whole new domain in the forest. And Virgo could have, students.virgo.edu, faculty.virgo.edu, all that, right? But we're just going to go ahead with this because we want a second domain controller. We're not making this a read-only domain controller, but we could and then put it in a branch office. I'm going to type in the directory services restore mode password here because when I promote something to a domain controller status, I have to know what that Active Directory recovery password is. I'm making a serious change to the entire domain by adding a domain controller. I'm going to select next. It says a delegation for DNS cannot be created because the authority parent zone cannot be found. I'm going to update or not. Let's see. No, I'm just going to go ahead. It says specify install from media or replicate from any domain controller. We're going to replicate from any domain controller. We're going to store a copy of the canis.local domain in these storage volumes. This is going to be another copy of the centralized security account management database, the SAM, an enterprise SAM. See all the options are here. I'm going to go ahead and click next. It's going to work this. I get the same kinds of error messages, but the main point is I don't see anything red. I don't see a red X. I'm going to install. And in just a minute, I'll have a second domain controller that's working that I can use to enforce group policy and so on. I'm seeing that domain information is replicating. It says you're about to be signed out. I'll say server was successfully configured as a domain controller. Woohoo! Now, as that reboots, when it comes up, it's a domain controller, which means I'm going to see one less here, and I'm going to see one more in domain controllers. I have all I need to work login scripts, enforce group policy objects, automate everything. And you saw I've built 2 main servers, installed domain roles, and set up an entire Active Directory enterprise infrastructure in 1 hour and a half, basically. We got started about 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late. I had a faculty meeting that ran over. So about an hour and 10 minutes is all it took to set up a domain, a full-scale Fortune 500 worthy, run any government in the world domain. If I refresh this now, I should see Mensa disappear. Yeah. I should see it reappear in domain controllers when I refresh this. Yeah. Now here's the cool thing. You can always tell the health of your domain controllers by running a simple command from the command prompt. This is a really cool thing to know. So I'm going to pin this to the start. I haven't even gotten into PowerShell yet, but basically what I'm going to do is right click and run as admin. The command is called repadmin /sync all. If I have good health between my 2 domain controllers or 3 domain controllers or 10 domain controllers, when I hit enter, what I should get is that sync all finished and that there were no errors. It says there is an error here, can't reach, topology incomplete, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So there could be some DNS entries we need to tweak with yet, but we're very close to having something that's running completely, it's running 100%. So this is like 95%. What we want to do is be able to reach both domain controllers. And a lot of times it's just a question of updating your DNS. What do I mean? The 2 domain controllers should look at each other first for DNS, because the DNS that they need to manage the entire domain is running on their own machine. The DNS they use to get out on the internet is the secondary. What am I saying? I'm going to change my setting here briefly, and hopefully this will fix the problem. I'm going to go into here. And I'm going to tell this, you'll notice it's pointed to itself. I don't want to use 127.0.0.1. What I want to do is use, I want it to point to the other domain controller, 192.168. Well, it can point to itself first, and that's 244. But I also want it to point to Mensa. So I'm going to put in 192.168.50.245. And then I'm going to add the other domain controller, Mercury, 192 to get out on the internet when I need to. .50.246. 244, the local machine, 245, its domain controller partner, 246, the DNS server that helps it get out on the internet for updates. I'm going to click OK, 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 close, close, close. And now I'm going to do something a little unusual. I'm going to do ipconfig /flush DNS, because the DNS that was in the cache before is not right. I'm going to go into here on Mensa, and I'm going to do the same thing, only in reverse. Then we're going to run the rep admin again, just to make sure it's working right. If that's good, I'm ready to add 100 new systems and manage them all centrally without a hitch. So let's go into our internet network settings. I'm going to have it point to itself first, 245. I'm going to have it point to .244, 192.168.50.244. That's Orion. And then I'm going to add 246 for the internet. Because Mercury on 246 helps everybody find stuff out on the internet. It's really important that you configure your DNS to work that way. In fact, it's so important, one thing that you ought to do is change one more little setting here. So DNS, right? On here, what we want to do on my DNS is we want to set up a forward. I want to forward to 246 and then to 111, 1.1.1.1 and 8.8.8.8. In fact, I don't want my domain controllers to go out to the internet. This is very, very important. This is one of those things that exposes domain controllers in most organizations, and they don't change this, and they should. I'm going to uncheck the box that says use root hints if no forwarders are available. I don't want it to go out to the internet. I'm going to edit this. I'm going to remove this. I got to remove that. But I am going to put 192.168.50.246 because Mercury is designed for that. I want Mercury to do the heavy lifting. It's still showing midnight.net, so I got to change that. I want Mercury to show Kenneth.local. That's probably on Mercury inside the DNS. That's probably what it's doing. Yep. That's probably what's going on. So I'm going to say okay. And now I know that when this machine needs to go out on the internet, it doesn't go out on the internet itself. So most of the other machines in the domain are going to point to the domain controllers, or they're going to point to the DNS server. And whenever they need domain stuff, the stub zone on the DNS server is going to say, hey, go to Mensa or go to Orion. You don't want these machines going out to the internet for anything. You want it to listen for DNS only on this IP address. So we've locked that down. I'm going to flush DNS now and restart it on the server. And then we're going to be done. On my DNS, I'm going to clear the cache. Let me look at the forward lookup zones and make sure I don't have any. Oh, there's remnants of midnight.net. I'm going to take that out. Clear the cache, restart the service. Let's go out to Mercury and make sure we don't have any loose ends there. And then we're going to run our command and we'll be done for the day. I'm going to log in another user. I also need to clean up the hosts file. So that's one thing I'm going to do in just a minute. So in here, if I have Notepad, pin to the start, run as admin. I'm going to go to the hosts file in Notepad. I think midnight.net is a reference in there. So sometimes you get weirdness that happens because you still have those old references. And the sooner you get rid of them, the better off you are. Oh yeah, well, no, I don't have midnight.net references in there, but I might have it in my DNS. I'm guessing that's where the last remnants of this are. So let's look in here. No, I don't have it in here. So I'm kind of curious. Well, I still had it over here. Anyway, I've gone ahead and I've cleaned up here. Let me see if I can run my command over on Orion. Not ipconfig, it's rep admin sync all. There we go. Can everybody see the difference? Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so oftentimes one common problem that happens is that people don't spend a little quality time to get the kinks out with the DNS. To change over every old reference, to completely eliminate everything, to flush the caches, to clear the server cache, to restart the DNS service and so on, to make sure that any previous or older references to workgroups or other domains is removed. When you try to sync, if you get this, it means your Active Directory is healthy. It means you're ready to go ahead full speed. It means you can automate everything. And that's the key to getting a solid foundation. When you're building a house, you got to get the concrete right. If this foundation isn't right, the whole house suffers afterwards. What you just witnessed firsthand from 2:15 until 3:45 in about a 90-minute period is everything that's needed to get something squared away. Over on Orion, I want to make the same changes to DNS I did over on Mensa. Meaning I'm going to go into here on my DNS on Orion. I'm going to go into the properties on Orion. I'm going to say I only want DNS on this address. And for forwarders, I don't want to use root hints. And I want to edit this and get rid of this, right? Going to delete this, going to delete that. Going to add 192.168.50.246 Mercury. It's still pulling that old midnight.net reference, but I think after a couple of reboots, that's probably going to disappear. On Mercury, I'm going to check and make sure that suffix is already removed. Another little trick is to go to Mercury and basically, let's clear the cache and then restart the service. Yep. I'm going to capture this screen and I'll call this 6 success. All right, that's pretty much what I wanted to show you, was how easy it is to set up something that's actually scalable and easy to maintain. And from here, you can remotely access any computer that's on the domain. You can manage it. You can automate software installs. You can reconfigure from a distance. You can change printers from a distance. It's just amazing. So it's really worth the time and a little bit of energy to get an enterprise security account management model set up. Don't do old school, don't do quick and easy. Take a few extra steps and then, well, then you get to go home on time. You get to have a life. Are there any questions from you before we finish our session today?
No questions.
First thing we're going to demonstrate on Tuesday in this new domain is how a group policy object will change everything across the domain in all 4 systems. It's a thing of beauty. We're also going to demonstrate setting up scripts to automate everything in the domain. So whenever you log in anywhere, you have access to all your stuff. That's what we're doing on Tuesday. Tuesday will be our last class. We'll try to get started as close to 2 o'clock as possible. I don't have other meetings planned for that time. Thank you for hanging tough and for staying a little long today so we could finish this demonstration. Does anyone have any questions before we end our class? Why don't I have?
No.
Okay. We'll stop recording.